Looks like his farm's buried, his house is buried, his car is buried. Chances are that car wasn't paid off yet, but he's still going to have to pay on those debts. Yeah. And God's got nothing. Beep. Oh, Kansas. Now, if you're in a city and you see the dust bowls coming like this, yeah, you breathe this stuff in. Respiratory disease, pretty much a guarantee. There's no Medicaid, there's no Medicare, there's no national health insurance, and yes, the air around you is good chance it's going to kill you. What do you tell this mother? It's probably one of the most important images of the Great Depression era. It's oftentimes referred to as a Hooverville family. This is a young mother, single, the baby in her arms, another child, living in garbage. You call this woman a lazy bum and a welfare queen? Because you can't, because welfare doesn't exist yet. You can't call her a lazy bum because there are no jobs. If she had a job, she certainly didn't lose it because of her own hard work ethic. And what do you tell to her kids? How do you inspire them? And even if Americans don't experience this directly, this is the fear of every American throughout the 1930s. Beep. And boy, oh boy, President Hoover's got some problems. The great blessing of a political campaign is that if you were able to win the House of Representatives, the Senate, and the presidency for one political party, it means that unless there's some people on the Supreme Court who are going to try and keep you in check, is you now control the government. And you can pass anything and everything that you want without opposition. The problem with that, though, and it's the reason why the system is set up like this, is so that radical change cannot happen. Is that if you try and instigate radical change and something goes wrong, you will be held accountable. Welcome to the great crisis of the Republican Party in 1928. The Republican Party sweeps both houses of Congress. President Hoover is in power, and he keeps encouraging Americans to invest in the stock market. And they keep cutting taxes. They keep deregulating elements of the economy that the progressives had put in a generation before that. And when Wall Street crashes, there is no backup plan. What Hoover does initially might sound familiar to a number of us. If you think about the early period of Obama's first term in office, those first couple of months, the great controversy of that was not Obama establishing socialism. It was Obama taking over the exact same plan as President Hoover, the Republican, and taking American taxpayer money and handing it out to private corporations. That's not socialism, that's called corporate fraud. And American taxpayers, they get upset about that. What we're going to see here is Hoover creates what's called the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. Is taking American taxpayer money, the little bit that exists, handing that money over to private individuals to try and stabilize the economy with almost no oversight. And yeah, it becomes controversial, particularly for the fact since this is before any type of social programs. There's no unemployment insurance. There's no welfare programs. If you're elderly or injured, there's no Social Security. If you remember our statistics prior to World War I, and about 150,000 American workers being injured on the job every year. Yeah, if there's no unemployment insurance, no Social Security, yeah, if you lose your job at this time, yeah, you're homeless and you starve. And the problem for President Hoover is he firmly believes that government is always the problem and never the solution. And he's afraid if he starts getting the government involved in the economy, that will stagnate economic recovery. And that yeah, that if you just sit back and wait, that the market will regulate itself and fix itself. And in the meantime, yeah, American people are relying upon soup kitchens and bread lines being financed by churches to keep them fed. And the great problem and challenge with that is, unlike the LDS Church in a place like Utah, I'm thankful that young Mormons from southern Utah have never had to experience this before, and I hope they never do. But in the world outside, yes, other churches, if they have any ability to assist people, it's very, very limited. Other churches don't have bishops who have storehouses. They don't prepare for things such as crises. So yeah, other churches, they're hanging on here for a while, and eventually they're going to run out of food, they're going to run out of money. And then what do you do if there's no social programs? Yeah, and Hoover's reply, the problem for Hoover is he gets so out of touch in all of this. Hoover is asked by a reporter in 1932 if he had any recommendations for the American people, because the economy was still in ultimate chaos. And Hoover's reaction is he said, well, I think the American people are good and innovative people, and they should take advantage of the free time they have with unemployment and perhaps do something like learn how to play a guitar, work on your whistling abilities, and just smile more, and we'll all be okay in the end. Yeah, when the President of the United States tells hardworking Americans who've been living on the streets for several years to learn how to whistle better, yeah, there might be a bit of a disconnect between the American experience and between politicians. Particularly if that politician calls out General MacArthur and federal troops to attack American veterans in the streets of Washington, D.C. Welcome to the birth of the political career of General Smedley Butler, who is a person we'll start dealing with more and more today. We've already read him, but let's ask the question, why does Butler have the view that he has about the world, and why is this Marine so angry? Because he's got some good reason to be angry. After serving over 30 years in the U.S. Marine Corps, Smedley Butler retired, and he immediately got involved in politics. For a while, he was working at the police in Philadelphia, trying to enforce prohibition laws, which, yeah, having a U.S. Marine helping on that, it's a good idea. But yeah, in 1932, he decides to give a political voice to American veterans. And after much encouragement, both from the VFW, Veterans of Foreign Wars, and the American Legion, Smedley Butler organizes a group of veterans to go to Washington, D.C. to demand that the 1945 bonus that had been promised them be paid out immediately. What Butler is hoping will be a good gambling chip here, or a trump card, is he says, 1932, about half of Congress is up for re-election, and President Hoover's up for re-election. So let's put political pressure on them. Bring 20,000 veterans into D.C., camp out on the Capitol lawn in shanty towns, and demand to be paid that bonus. The problem in this scenario, yes, the House of Representatives is going to say, yes, those veterans need assistance, they need our help, and yeah, this makes sense, and even though we're kind of broke, let's assist the veterans. When it gets up to the U.S. Senate, controlled by Republicans at the time, say that assisting those veterans would be fiscally irresponsible. So they kill the bill before it can even get to Hoover. And President Hoover simply tries to ignore the entire scenario, hoping veterans will just pack up and go home. What is going to occur is Congress kills the bill of assistance that veterans need and offers to buy them train tickets. As Congress is adjourning for their summer recess, there are 5,000 of those 20,000 veterans who have been given train tickets to go back home. The problem is they don't really have a home to go back to. And General Butler encourages those 15,000 other veterans to stand their ground, not be pushed around, and to not leave D.C. until they're paid. So General Hoover called in the troops. General MacArthur comes in with a number of federal troops, opens fire on veterans of World War One, and creates one of the worst crises any sitting president has ever seen. And they're trying to start the re-election campaign. Yep. We look at a couple of quotes from this time. We get some sense here of the crisis that Hoover has created. Paul Anderson, who was a reporter from the state of Missouri, who was there in D.C. to cover this, wrote and said, Hoover's campaign for re-election was launched Thursday, July 18th at Pennsylvania Avenue and 3rd Street with 4 troops of cavalry, 4 companies of infantry, a mounted machine gun squadron, 6 whippet tanks, 300 city policemen, and a squad of Secret Service men and Treasury agents. Among the results immediately achieved were the following. 2 veterans of the World War shot to death, 1 11-week-old baby in a grave condition from gas shock and exposure, 1 8-year-old boy partially blinded by gas, 2 policemen's skulls fractured, 1 bystander shot through the shoulder, 1 veteran's ear severed with a cavalry saber, 1 veteran stabbed in the hip with a bayonet, more than a dozen veterans, policemen, and soldiers injured by bricks and clubs, upward of 1,000 men, women, and children gassed, including policemen, reporters, ambulance drivers, and residents of Washington, and approximately $10,000 worth of property destroyed by fire, including clothing, food, and temporary shelter of the veterans, and a large amount of building material owned by a government contractor. Beep. Malcolm Cowley was there to report on veterans after the event for the publication at the time called The Nation. Malcolm Cowley followed a group of these veterans as they left D.C. and tried to keep tabs on what they planned on doing now. Cowley reported, mile after mile we passed the ragged line as we too drove northward to the camp at Ideal Park. We were carrying 2 of the veterans, chosen from a group of 300 by a quick informal vote of their comrades. One was a man gassed in Aragon and tear gassed at Anacostia. He breathed with an effort, as if each breath would be his last. The other was a man with family troubles. He had lost his wife and 6 children during the retreat from Camp Marks, helped to find them in Johnstown. He talked about his service in France, his 3 medals which he refused to wear, his wounds, his 5 years in a government hospital. If they gave me a job, he said, I wouldn't care about the bonus. Now I never want to see that flag again. Give me a gun and I'll go back to Washington. That's right, buddy, said a woman looking up from her 2 babies who lay in a dirty quilt in the sun. A cloud of flies hovered above them. Another man was reading the editorial page of a Johnston newspaper. He shouted, let them come here and mow us down with machine guns. We won't move this time. That's right, buddy, said the woman again. A haggard face, eyes bloodshot, skin pasty, white under a 3 days beard, suddenly appeared at the window of the car. Hoover must die, said the face ominously. You know what this means? A man shouted from the other side. This means revolution. Yes, you're damn right it means revolution. Okay, so it doesn't mean revolution. But it also means, if you send in the troops to fire on veterans, 1932, Daffy Duck would have defeated President Hoover. The other thing to understand is this experience radicalized General Smedley Butler even more. And what occurred during this time, we need to differentiate. We've talked about this a couple of times, the difference between conspiracy theory and the history of conspiracies. Conspiracy theory is a bogus BS thing that people like Hitler did, because you take a little grain of truth and you spin it into a whole huge worldview and you say, I don't have the other information because it's a conspiracy and it's been hidden. History relies upon documents, evidence, and oftentimes conspiracies don't leave evidence, but sometimes they do. And we look at very controversial things that happen in American history, that are well documented and well supported in the historic record, and they're a little too uncomfortable, is we either A, ignore them, try and pretend they never happened, or B, we dismiss it as conspiracy theory. So let's tell the story of when the Morgan family and the DuPont family, two of the wealthiest families in the United States, attempted to overthrow the American Constitution and to institute a Nazi-style dictatorship. Which sounds strange, but perhaps this will make some sense. General Smedley Butler, after the bonus pay affair in summer of 1932, he was angry, he was vengeful, he was upset, but he didn't have an outlet for his politics. What occurred just after President Roosevelt came to office in March of 1933, Smedley Butler was contacted by a man by the name of Gerald McGuire. Gerald McGuire was a corporate lawyer, but also head of the American Legion in Connecticut. Gerald McGuire, when he met with General Butler, asked General Butler if he had any interest in getting involved in politics again. And General Butler said, I helped Roosevelt with his campaign for a bit, but I don't really know what to do, so I'm not sure. What do you have in mind? Gerald McGuire at the time did not give Butler any details, but what he said is the people I represent would like you to know that the DuPont family in May of 1933 just bought the company called Remington Rifle, which means the DuPont family owning Remington Rifle has access to their own personal arsenal. General Butler says, so what do you mean by that? And McGuire said, just think about it, put together the pieces, I'll be back in a couple of weeks to talk to you. And what General Butler started doing over the next several months is he met with Gerald McGuire as many times as possible to try and find out as many details as possible to give evidence to show that the Morgan family and the DuPont family were trying to overthrow the U.S. government and overthrow Roosevelt. Their argument at the time being, since Hitler came to power in March of 1933, and the first thing he did was he abolished all unions to help German industrialists recover from the Great Depression, as American industrialists said, well, that's not fair. Germany has unfair competition, and we need to get rid of the unions here. In order to do that, we need an American-style Hitler. And they asked General Butler if he would be that Hitler. What is going to occur is they tell General Butler that they have all of the guns that Butler might need. They want General Butler to march back to Washington, D.C. with several 100,000 men who are heavily armed and to seize control of the U.S. government. The reason why General Butler starts talking to these people and continues to talk about them is not that he wants to be a participant, it's that he wants to expose all of this. Because this is called treason. The problem for General Butler is he contacts President Roosevelt in the early days of 1934 and says, Mr. President, I have a story I want to share with you, and you need to hear about this. President Roosevelt quickly realized that the story that General Butler was telling him was perhaps true, but the question Roosevelt had is, what can I do about it? So what Roosevelt did quite creatively is he leaked the story to the press. And over the next couple of weeks, every major newspaper and reporter were talking about what they called the business plot, but they were making fun of it. Roosevelt's strategy on this is, even though these families were attempting to commit treason and plotting treason, if you take some of the wealthiest families in the United States and throw them in prison for treason or execute them in the middle of an economic depression, they are not going to work along with you when it comes to economic recovery. So in order to deal with this threat, if he leaks the story to the press and people are aware of it and people are joking around about it, then you can't get away with it in the future. And General Butler was furious. For the fact the press was talking about this phenomenon so much, Congress decided to launch an investigation. And after multiple interviews, when they called in Gerald McGuire for an interview, he mysteriously died right before going before that congressional committee. They came back with this conclusion. They said the Congressional Committee investigating un-American activities has just reported that the fascist plot to seize the government was proved, yet not a single participant will be prosecuted under the perfectly plain language of the Federal Conspiracy Act, making this a high crime. Beep. And now you know the context of why and when General Smedley Butler wrote War is a Racket. We look at this quote here and understand the context they wrote this. He said, I spent 33 years and 4 months in active service in the country's most agile military force, the Marines. I served in all ranks from second lieutenant to major general. And during that period, I spent most of my time being a high-class muscle man for big business, for Wall Street, and the bankers. In short, I was a racketeer, a gangster for capitalism. I suspected I was just part of a racket at those times, and now I am sure of it. During those years, I had, as the boys in the back room would say, a swell racket. I was rewarded with honors, medals, and promotion. Looking back on it, I feel I might have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate a racket in 3 city districts. As a Marine, I controlled 3 continents. Yes, and if you wonder why General Butler was inspired to expose this behind-the-scene phenomenon, if you can imagine a general who had spent 33 years at the time as the most highly decorated Marine in U.S. history, having wealthy people trying to buy him off to overthrow the U.S. government he had spent his life trying to protect, and now starting to build up products and starting the march to World War II. So this is when General Butler says we need to take the profit out of war, we need to expose war as a racket, and we need to make sure that World War II does not occur. Yep. And that is the end for today. And that was almost perfect. 1 minute and 21 seconds over. Oh, and the first, I think I nailed that right on the spot.
Now, I have to sneak back into purgatory before they realize the man in black. I ain't going back. I'm not being creepy, this is YouTube. I'm being virtually creepy. I'll see you on Thursday, kids.